Hello, good afternoon. Michael Winn, Chief Digital Officer of Digital Ops, division of RB Oppenheim Associates. And today I'm joined again by Katie Lilly from Lilyfield Accounting Solutions. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. Always good to be here.
Absolutely. So here we are. It's Friday. So guess what? We're talking Traction, the book by Gino Wickman, How to Get a Grip on Your Business Before a Business Gets a Grip on You. And this week, we're going to talk about chapter 6, which is the issues component. Katie, this chapter, I think, is probably one of the most down in the dirt, nitty gritty chapters of like all of the chapters that we've done.
It just gets to the point because I
Yeah.
remarked that it was super short, but it's
Right.
like short and get to the point.
Yep.
But yeah, well, you all know what your issues are.
Well, I think, the first page of this chapter was I mean, it's like, they've got the heading, so there's only like 3 little paragraphs, but it was chock full of just some really great things. For me, the takeaway was, dealing with issues is really about understanding what's keeping you from moving forward.
Yes.
Or what's holding you back
Bogging
from
you down is
realizing your full potential.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Who doesn't want that?
Right.
Who doesn't want to eliminate those things? I think the difficult thing that companies are going to experience with this issue is it's a lot easier just to focus on the numbers, like, dollars in, expenses out, hitting sales goals. But when you get into the issues, you have to deal with people.
Yes.
And processes.
Yes.
And that's emotionally draining. And I think
Yes.
There's a lot of people, I think, that are afraid of confrontation,
Mm-hmm.
who avoid that at
Yes.
all costs,
Yes.
But yet, I thought it was interesting. He cites several examples in a large study of like 25,000 companies who said, if we didn't deal with these issues, we would not have grown.
Right. Right.
What was that quote? Because that was really good. I think
I don't know if I underlined that one. Lack of decision or procrastination.
Oh yeah.
Was one of the major causes of failure.
Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. Yeah. The study of 25,000 people.
I have read that book.
Wow.
I have apparently not thought enough.
And the other thing that I think is really interesting too is he uses the analogy of a mushroom. Now, I'm not a planter grower type person, but I understand that mushrooms grow and thrive in darkness.
Yes.
Right? You don't cultivate mushrooms in the bright, sunny outdoors. So, issues are like mushrooms in that if they are kept dark and not dealt with, they will thrive and then they multiply, right? And then your problems you have
bigger.
Yeah. And then things come crashing.
Right.
It's not good.
Right.
So when you bring them to the light, they diminish. But the only way to do that, to really deal with that, I think is you have to have a culture of openness and honesty.
Right. And not only you, but your employees need to feel safe to be able to mention what the issues are without any type of ramifications.
Yep. I think that I feel like the generation of Gen X and millennials that are going to come into leadership, that this is going to be a really big sticking point for them.
In that they don't feel safe?
That they want that. That's going to be a priority for them compared to other generations.
That just sucked it up.
Like baby boomers.
Like stoic.
Right.
Got it.
My grandparents, they never really talked about things,
everything
was
just
kind of
grin and bear it.
Yeah. We're not going to deal with that, whereas I don't think the generation that's coming up, that's going to be coming into management and into leadership, in the C-suite, they're going to dig this stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're all about authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
They have a really high BS meter.
Right.
And I think this is really key. All right. So the other thing that I really, really love, and I put this out on my LinkedIn and Instagram account, I love this idea of decide promptly and implement slowly.
Yes. And he says, it's not so much what you decide, it's that you decide.
100%. Like that's the one thing that's like, okay, let's make a decision. Let's do it. We can pay to make whatever corrections we need, but the loss of potential opportunity for not deciding is much greater than the cost to fix something that you decide, oh, that wasn't the right choice.
How are you with decisions? What's your decision style?
Yeah, I think I'm getting better. I think I do an exhaustive amount of research when it comes to making a decision that's, going to impact things. So, I try to make an educated decision, but I think that as I'm going through this book and thinking about and learning about what's important, it's becoming easier to make decisions faster.
Right.
I
always feel like if the decision isn't crystal clear, it's not ready to be made yet.
Okay.
But I try to keep that. I don't want to go back on that as my reason for not deciding, though. It's just sometimes I feel like things feel forced. And when I feel like I'm backed into a corner and I'm being forced to make a decision, then I feel like I go on my gut and I'm like, the decision does not need to be made right now. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that is very. All right, so he breaks right into sort of creating your issues list so that you can identify them. And obviously, if we're working in the context of his operating system, we're going to have the vision traction organizer, which is going to have our section with rocks, which is our 90-day issues or our 90-day goals, objectives, things that we're working on. And so there may be some things that he talks about. Number one, when you're making a list, there's three kinds. One would be ones that are in your VTO, right? That are
high level.
You could kind of put on a shelf to a certain degree because you may need time to make a decision, but like 90 days is sort of that timeline compared to the other two, which are your weekly leadership list and then your departmental list. Now, for my company, we're a smaller team, less than 6, so we don't really have departmental, but we have weekly where it's just a team. So that's a little different. Now, I know with your crew, you're a little bit larger, and so do you have it broken up into those separate?
No, I don't think we're big enough that we've got to actually have departmental, but I think our managers bring those departmental issues to the weekly leadership meeting and we deal with them there. So we are looking at those things.
Right. So, and then I think, identifying these different kinds of lists is important. I think the next thing that he jumps into is, okay, here is a quick formula for solving your issues. Like it's a track, and you move it through this track of identify what the issue is, discuss what the issue is, and then solve the issue. And I think the point that he really makes in there, which is totally true, which is when you get in one of these discussion times, the evil tangent comes up.
Yeah.
Right. And then the next thing you know, you're freaking way off here talking about this other thing
that has nothing to do with the original thing.
Right.
The other thing he brings up too is that sometimes when you identify the issue, it's not really the issue, which I think is why the discussion is helpful, because you may be like, oh, this is the issue. And then when you dig into it and you kind of peel back the layers of it, you realize it's really a different core issue and that what you're identifying are just symptoms of it. So the discussion, so identify the issue, and then the discussion is a big piece because that's really where you get down to the root, but it's also where the tangents can happen. So that middle piece is you really got to have someone that's kind of being watchful of that in your meetings, or being mindful, I should say, of making sure you're staying on task, that you're identifying the right thing, but you're staying on task as well.
I think the other thing that he talks about later in the chapter is that, when your team is completely on board with the whole thing of having an operating system, having core values, having a core focus, having a marketing strategy, having a 10-year goal, 3-year goal, 1-year goal, 90 days, and working through your list. When everyone understands that, then he paints this sort of picture of that people feel like they're part of this sort of greater good for the entity of everyone as a whole.
Right.
And that's why you dig into these things.
Right.
And, I think that's a really interesting, sort of picture to paint, because I feel like when I've worked in companies before, I didn't really feel like I was part of this greater good, bigger thing. I really didn't care. I just wanted my paycheck, and I wanted to.
Did you feel like you were working for the man?
100%.
So that's what this has been so helpful for me, is because making the transition from sole proprietor to a firm, especially with some of my longer term clients, how do I get from Katie Lilly is doing our books to Lilly Field is doing our books, and get away from, my bookkeepers are working for me as the man, to we are all in this together, creating this culture of bookkeeping best practices called Lilly Field. And so this has been super helpful with that, getting away from it's Katie's business, Yeah. So that's been super helpful on here.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was interesting. I got together with my team this morning, and we were just kind of going through, we're a few weeks behind. We actually were wrestling with the core values this morning. And, we had this discussion on one particular core value, and I was asking for, what does this word really mean to you guys? And so the team, kind of spoke collectively, and, the word was respectful. And, it has so many different things. Like, does that mean we're respectful of our clients? Are we respectful of each other? Do people see us as, they respect our business? So it has like all kinds of different meanings, you know? And I think what ended up happening was, as we went through this discussion, we found that, it has a really deeper meaning that's almost like it's an empathy for one another. It's an empathy to connect with our clients. Like, it's so deep. And then what was really cool was we got into this whole sort of uncovering an issue that was unresolved from a couple of weeks ago, but was fruit that came out of this deciding, hey, this is a core value that we are, and that we're going to continue to work on. And we saw immediate results when we named it and said this is what it was. Right. It was so refreshing. And
that's super cool, because as you're talking, I was like, wow, that really is like a core, like exactly like the meaning of a core value, that you felt it so deeply and so like viscerally that it like struck you to your core. Yeah. And because it was a core value, it banged up against that thing, creating the issue.
Right.
So that's cool.
Yeah. And I mean, there were like, I'm sorry's and tears and hugs. Like, it was
I'm bumming I missed that.
I know. Of course, I was the one crying.
I can see that. Okay.
Yeah. But really, again, it's a reminder that I think, that experience that we had this morning was part of building on this idea that when you go through issues, when you're open and honest, and that truly is the environment, the culture that you have,
you'll become unstoppable.
Right?
Yeah.
The numbers say you will not be held back.
Right.
You will move forward.
Right.
And that's super pumped me up today.
Yes. I love it.
So, all right. So again, I think we kind of hammered home what the track is: identify, discuss, and solve. Watch out for tangents. And then he busts into sort of, okay, here are some very tactical, practical things. He calls them the 10 commandments of solving issues. So start up, tell me, I know you had a couple that really, sort of struck out.
Yeah.
Stood out. So
I had 3 that stuck out for me. So one was number 6, thou shalt not try to solve all problems. So when you're starting out on this track, and you, like the very first meeting we had where we identified all our issues, I had each person on the leadership team identify theirs. And then we kind of put them all in a cauldron and distilled them down to, because, we were all, some of them we were saying the exact same things, just different ways. So you come up with this laundry list, and it is very easy to get very overwhelmed by the amount of items on your issues list, especially the first time you're doing it.
Yep.
So what was helpful was the chapter about rocks, where you're pulling out the most important. So as you're discussing, certain ones are just going to naturally float to the top. And then you decide, you have to make a hard decision to pick no more than 10 for your quarterly rocks. And those are the ones you're going to solve. And it's helpful because when you're having your weekly meetings, different issues may come up, and you may just have to say, that's going to be something we work on next quarter, so that you don't get overwhelmed, because you're not going to be able to solve all of them right away.
Right.
So that was one. Number 9 was thou shalt enter the danger. The issue you fear the most is the one you most need to discuss. So, and that's what we're doing. That was our number 1. And I would have never guessed this. When we did all our issues, I thought for sure it was going to be standardized, would be the one that floats to the very, very top. But the one that floated to the very, very top was security. And it came from all 3 of us in different ways. And I'm happy to say that we have now since hired an IT firm.
Smart.
So we definitely identified that and have solved that problem. So that was great. And it was one of those where I said, gosh, what is it that keeps me up at night? And then that was kind of what floated to the top. And then thou shalt take a shot. So that one is, if you're going to take a shot, if you're going to, say, hey, this is an issue, present a solution. Don't just be a complainer. Now, this one speaks more to me personally. It's the kind of person I am. Like, I just, please don't complain. Like, if you're going to complain, be part of the solution. So that was the one that just is like my personal credo.
I think the one that really kind of, speaks to me is number 4, thou shalt not rely on secondhand information. And, he specifically talks about, if you're trying to deal with an issue, you can't deal with an issue if it deals with a person who's not in the room to discuss the issue. That makes, total sense.
Yes.
I would take it one, and maybe it's a stretch or a tangent, but when I thought about that and reflecting again on today's session that we had with our team, I've had a saying for a long time: don't cook with ingredients you don't have. And what that means is that, sometimes when you're trying to work through a problem internally and you're thinking about how other people are thinking about you or how you're thinking about them, you put some assumptions together and you put it in this saute pan and you put it over the stove and you start cooking with this stuff that's from your brain that's really not true. You've just concocted it in your brain, almost like secondhand information that you don't know if it's true or not. Right. And you're cooking with it, and you're stewing, right? And that's a problem. And so, I think ultimately, like what we talked about in our meeting today was, let's recognize that that's a thing, that we do that as humans. Right? Human nature. We're just human. And the only way to kind of work around that or work through that or not allow that to, grow and fester, right, is to be able to talk openly and honest to one another. So I think, and especially when, you can create an environment where people can advance in their own path without this sort of jockeying for position and titles. When everyone has a clear path of how to go where they need to go to succeed and fulfill themselves in life, which is part of the culture we're trying to build, right? Right. Then they are part of the greater good, which is the second one that I really like. Right. So they kind of really tie hand in hand. You can't work for the greater good if you have animosity or resentment towards a coworker. Right. So you got to have a place and a space to have those conversations. And I think that in the past, companies have not necessarily dealt with that because it's sort of just personal feelings. But I think it's interesting. Gary Vaynerchuk, one of his C-suites is Chief Heart Officer.
I love it.
And she's basically like HR.
Right.
But the fact that she's the chief heart officer tells you there is something very different going on than HR director.
Okay, so this might be fodder for a whole nother podcast.
Tangent.
But going on a tangent.
Okay.
So what you're speaking of to me sounds like a collaborative culture versus a competitive culture.
Right.
And I think going back to the very beginning, if I'm going to tie things all together, the millennials and the Gen X that's coming up seem to be more collaborative minded versus competitive.
Yep.
And it just reminds me of my very first days in the accounting practice back in the day, where they would take the starting accounting class of 30 people and they would rank their staff accountants. And after every major engagement, they'd rank them again. And it just fostered this culture of competition, and I've just got to be better than this person, and I personally did not thrive in that environment. So.
Right. And it is interesting, the last section of the book, after we get through sort of the 10 Commandments, is he actually brings up dealing with personal issues in the session. So like today, one of the things that we did was I said, okay, listen, here's what happens. I get stressed out, and when I'm stressed out, this is what I do. I either get really sharp and short with people, or I just shut down, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, I know what you guys do. Do you want me to tell you? And they were like, yeah. So
you told them?
Yeah, I told them.
Were you right? Were you right?
I was 100% right. Yeah, absolutely.
Were they all sheepish?
No, they were like, oh my gosh, Michael's paying attention,
I love it.
So that really opened this door, because I started with, I know about me, right? I'm 48 years old, I'm starting to figure some stuff out about myself,
yes.
Right? So, when I told them, but I did it it was very constructive, and it was very well received, again, because we were all hugs and tears and afterwards, but, it was very restorative, and then they were able to do it with each other, sort of like, oh, I noticed this. And so then we said, okay, if that's how you respond, is it best for us to try to talk to you then at that time when you're doing it, or should we wait 24 hours? And we all decided, don't try to tackle it right then and there, because we're, what?
Right.
But the next day, talk about it.
Yes.
And
don't let it not go unsaid.
Unsolved.
Right.
And I feel like, that's really sort of, he talks about having a healthy company. And I think that many times there is a cancer in companies, and it's one or two people usually that are the cancer. I mean, you see it in football. I mean, look at all these crazy trades of all these prima donnas, they were cancer, but they were super talented, and these teams let them go, It's crazy.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is you are at a ceiling. If you can't deal with those personal issues, you are absolutely going to be held back from being able to realize your full potential.
Right.
100%. Wow, that's it. That is the issues component. Again, it's a really great chapter. For those of you who maybe are tuning in for the first time to the show, the podcast, this is Traction. Get a grip on your business before it gets a grip on you. It is so fantastic. Each Friday, I'm joined with Katie Lilly from Lilly Field Accounting Solutions, and the dynamics of our conversation is so interesting because your company is just, a couple of years old. Our agency has been around for 3 decades, but yet we're both going through this very transformative kind of period in our company growth. And I just hope that for those of you who are listening and watching, really get value out of joining us in this journey as we go through Traction. So I'm so glad that you guys joined in. Anything to add?
No, I was just going to mention what the next one is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
The process component.
All right. So
finding your way.
Next week, chapter 7, the process component, finding your way. Guys, thank you so much. My name is Michael Winn. I am the Chief Digital Officer of Digital Ops, the division of RB Oppenheimer Associates. Katie Lilly, thanks for joining in.
Always.
Catch you guys next Friday.